Hey, what's up, guys? It's Reid here. I'm bringing you part two of this $50 buy-in heads up no limit match. In the first part, we got into some pretty interesting spots, and we're out on top about $10 so far. I guess the money that Chia has right now is stuff that he won back from us. So going back and forth a little bit, and let's hop back into the action and see if we can get some stacks in. So you can see right away we're raising with 3-6 offsuit. I've been raising every single hand into 3 times the big blind. And this is just because I think I'm going to profit immediately. I don't think he's re-raising me enough pre-flop, so I can get away with this. Normally, you might not want to do that. On the 10-6-9 rainbow flop, I think I have a few options here. I could check back like it looks like I've chosen to do here, or I could continuation bet. And I think, optimal play aside, you have a few choices in flux here, or a few dynamics in flux rather. If I do continuation bet, I have the best hand a lot of the time, but I don't really expect to be called by a worse hand that often. And when I do, and it's something like King 7, I expect him to either improve on the turn and then keep calling me if I choose to bluff, or if the turn goes check check, I'm going to have to call a river bet. And that's going to be really difficult to do with just a pair of sixes on most board runouts, since about 80% of the time on each street the board changes, and it's going to be pretty difficult for me to continue with a pair of sixes. So the other option is I could check back. And checking back is still pretty tough, but I think just because this is a bit more passive of a player, that I think I'm going to get to showdown a little bit more often here, and he's just going to check down stuff like ace-8 or something like that, and give me an opportunity to show this hand down, unless the turn is particularly unfavorable. But we said before, unless I just want to start bluffing with a very wide range, which I'm not necessarily a fan of doing. You definitely want to balance your value bets, but beyond that, you're just going to be losing money. And he does hit this board pretty hard, and it doesn't really account for the fact that he could just go ahead and check raise bluff me with any hand. Like if he had King 2 of clubs, maybe he wants to try to represent the straight, because I only have it so often. And like I said, the board runs out pretty terribly for a lot of my made hands that would call the check raise. So it's definitely a delicate spot, and I think there's a lot to be said about it. But against this player, a pretty clear check back. Like I was hoping, he checks me on the turn, and I think I have the best hand a lot of the time. But I don't know, it's not a hand where I can get a ton of value. So I chose to make an exploitive play here and bet 1/3 the pot. And I think this bet gets called by a lot of ace highs and hands that I beat, and he's just going to check to me on the river if he's unimproved. I don't expect him to lead the river as a bluff very often after calling this bet. So if I do get called here, I think it's by a lot of hands that don't normally call me. And this player, insofar as we've seen, isn't really attacking exploitive plays or playing in such a way where I felt like this play would get me into trouble and make me fold a pair of sixes more often than I should be folding them if I got check raised. So he calls. The river's a king, pretty bad card for my range, just because he might expect me to continuation bet stuff like king queen or king jack or king 7, king 8, all that stuff on the flop. And a great one for his range, because all of those hands I believe are still in his range to some extent at least. So like I said, I don't think he's bluffing on the river, but this is a great spot for him to bluff. And when he bets pot, that it kind of confused me a little bit, just because for me to bet 1/3 pot, he probably has to assume I have a hand like the one I have. And if he's not going to do anything about it here, this would be a fantastic time for him to do something about it. I also think that he wouldn't expect me to call a pot-sized bet if I do just have bottom pair here, or I guess fourth pair here. So the pot size bet sizing kind of weirded me out and didn't make that much sense to me. So I wouldn't hate it if I called here. So let's see what I do. I guess I just let it go. Stuck with the first game plan. I don't know. I mean, I think either play could be fine. I just don't see this guy bluffing there that often. But yeah, thank you guys for checking out that last video. If you don't know, this is part 2 of, I don't know how many series I'll make for this, or how many videos I'll make for this. But I appreciate you guys taking a look. And if you can hit the like button on it and share it with some poker friends, it's definitely helpful. It's really easy. All you have to do is click that button. You can do it while you're watching the video right now. And, you know, it helps get the channel out there on YouTube. And that's pretty sweet because we're starting to get a decent amount of subscribers. But I'm really aiming higher for this. So if you guys can help me out, it would be awesome. But, oh, yeah, by the way, you know, you could see I flopped trips. Unfortunately, didn't get any action, so you know, that's sad. I would have expected him to see my continuation bet range is pretty polarized there, given that I checked back earlier with a 6-3, and so you know maybe he would check raise bluff me a bit more often, but unfortunately it didn't materialize. Ace Queen, certainly a standard re-raise heads up. I'm choosing a size of 9 big blinds. So it's 3 times the his original raise. I think it's pretty standard. On this flop, I think you can continuation bet. You can check call. I mean, really, like every single option is defensible in like a certain setting. So I mean, I could check raise bluff here to balance the times I want to check raise for value. I can continuation bet, although I don't think it works that often, especially if he's just floating stuff like a gut shot. Then I'm going to get stuck 2-barreling a lot of turns. But, you know, it's important for me to have hands like this every once in a while at least. So when the turn is a queen or an ace, I can get 3 streets from something like ace-7 or a queen-jack that called on the flop. So, you know, in addition to the times where if I did just bluff this with like, you know, maybe I had like a random king-9 suited or something like that that I decided to re-raise, I can represent an ace or queen turn and get credit for it. So it's important to have a balanced range here with, you know, all possible types of hands. And I think a lot of people don't put a lot of value on that. So even though I'm not like the biggest fan in the world, I do continuation bet and I take it down immediately, which is pretty good. That's a good board for him to try to bluff raise me on some percentage of the time, just because a lot of my hands are going to be like king queen, and if I'm continuation betting them, you know, like a very high percentage of the time, he probably makes money immediately by raising there. So you don't want to go overboard with the continuation bet, but I'm glad it worked there. And then, as you saw, my sizing was probably a bit large, but we're a little deeper stacked now. So I want to bet larger so I can threaten stacks by the river. And, you know, by that I mean I can just bet the turn for a reasonable size and then go all in on the river for maybe around 2/3 pot bet. 4-3 suited, you guys can see we're kind of in like a similar spot. And I decided to check back, and I think it was mostly due to what I said earlier about my continuation betting range seeming polarized. Just given the other plays I've been making, I felt like a check back was going to work a bit more often, you know, in my favor, and I could call a lot more turns just expecting him to bluff a bit wider, just, you know, making the assumption that my checking back range is weak, given that last hand where I did have 6-3 and ended up folding when he led the river. Also, like I was saying about the 10-8 hand where I flopped trips and he just folded the flop, I think my my continuation betting range appears a bit more polarized. So it's not really the best time against him, I think, to go ahead and continuation bet bottom pair, because I think he'll react to my continuation bet pretty well. And, you know, obviously I want to try to force him to make mistakes, not play better. So I check back. Luckily I turned 2 pair, so that's awesome. He checks again, and given what I said about him wanting to bluff me very often, I think he pretty much always has a hand with a similar amount of showdown value to something like ace high here. And I think I'll check call the turn very often, but it's going to be tough for me to get value on the river. So, we'll see how the hand plays out. That's why I bet a bit larger here, because I think I'm really only getting one street. So exploitively, I'm just going for the gold here. Try to get him to check call with ace nine. Then, of course, you can weigh that against the fact that if I bet larger, maybe he folds more often, and then I don't get, even the opportunity to value bet the river against ace high. So I think maybe a better play would have just been to bet 2, and maybe I make slightly more money, but that could just be me being results oriented after he ended up folding. Ace 9, it's a pretty strong hand heads up. I think I dominate a lot of his opening range. So I decided just to flat it. I don't really like re-raising it because what I talked about in the first part of the video is I already have a lot of ace-x hands that I'm re-raising for value. And so even though I do have blockers, and that's going to help my folding equity, with the ace making it less likely he has stuff like ace-queen or ace-king, I think this is just a hand that you want to call with most of the time. And if it comes ace high, I would expect 3 streets to go in with me having the best hand and him either bluffing me while I'm check calling or misplaying against my range if I decide to go for a check raise on a flop for value. Or if it comes like 3-2-9, I have a lot more combinations of strong hands in my range if I'm flatting stuff like this than if I'm just re-raising every single time. So those are all important things to have in your heads up game, and you can weigh the pros and cons of flatting a hand like ace 9 versus 3-betting it, and I think it's important that you take into consideration your entire game plan. The turn's pretty bad. The Queen of Diamonds is a really good card for him to barrel, because if I have something like ace 4 of hearts, it's going to be pretty tough for me to call down. Or I mean, ace 9 is essentially the same thing there, other than it's basically the same hand. So when he doesn't bet the turn, I think this player, and we've seen him playing pretty standardly, about what you would expect from not like the greatest heads-up player in the world, but he definitely has an idea of what's going on here. I think that just means he has a pair of 7s or something like that, where he's pretty sure that he's not going to get any more value if he bets, but he's also pretty sure he has the best hand often enough to see a showdown. So when I hit the 9 on the river, there are a few things to consider here about trying to value bet. If I do value bet, is he going to call me with a 7 or a 3? And I'm not really sure about that. If you guys have seen the first video, which I would definitely recommend checking out if you haven't, I did bluff 2 streets with queen 9 suited on one hand, and he called me down with ace high. So he's certainly capable of putting me on maybe a hand like ace high I'm bluffing with now, or just a bluff like a float or some sort of draw that I check called with on the flop if I had a hand like 5-6 of spades that I check called with. So if I do bet here, maybe he does call me some of the time with a 7. And then on the other side of that coin, or I know I keep saying that, but if I do check the river, I think I continue to look like ace high, and maybe he goes for value with a pair of 7s, and I can just call with my pair of 9s. Also, if he did have air, I think, even though it may not be correct for him to think this way, I think that he'll think he can represent hands like Jack 8 or King Jack at least better than I can. So checking with a strong hand here is a good idea as well, and strong relative to the line he's taking. I think ace 9 is best probably 90% of the time here. But the trick is, how do I maximize my value? And there's definitely a lot of weird spots like this in No Limit Hold'em, especially in heads up, where if I bet, I don't think he'll really call that often, and if I check, I don't think he'll really bet that often. So the decision ends up being pretty close, and you can kind of just work in what's best for your game plan. So I think here it would probably be for me to check call, but I think it's extremely close, so I don't mind betting. I bet 250, which is fine. I mean, obviously, I'm just trying to get value from a hand like a 7, but I'm not sure he thinks I would bluff for that amount, so I like it a bit less than, you know, if I could go back in time and bet a larger amount, I think it would. So, yeah, I hope you guys like this video. If you want to share it with some poker buddies, I would definitely appreciate it. Like I was saying earlier, it would help us grow, and it's really easy. Just click that like button down there, and you know, you can click like the share button and send it over Facebook or anything like that. It'd be really cool of you. So yeah, I'll make another part for you guys pretty soon. And I do know in the next part that we have some crazy hands, so it gets a lot more uh, just like psycho pre-flop re-raising and a lot less nuanced small pot poker. So if you're into that, get ready for the next video, and take care, guys.